This is big. Homeworks workshop this evening. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight. My name is Tiana Harrison, and I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator at Community Homeworks. If you're watching this live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussion or ask questions, please put that in the comment section as well. If you're watching this after the live broadcast, we're still happy to answer your questions. It just may take us a little longer to respond. This Green Living Series workshop was made possible by the generous support of the Kalamazoo Community Foundation's Love Where You Live Environment Fund. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with the mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our fundings from grants, gifts, and donations. So if you find value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website, communityhomeworks.org. Tonight's workshop is entitled Weatherization, and our instructors are Sam and Lee Taylor. Sam Eubank and Lee Taylor. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to learning more about weatherization.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Maybe.
So, what we're going to do this evening is a roundtable discussion where we will ask our experts different ways to properly weatherize our home. If you have any questions about that, feel free to put it in the chat. What I'm going to do is role play. The infamous Harriet homeowner is going to come on the scene and ask our instructors some questions. So I am a first-time homeowner. I recently bought my home. What is it that I need to do to make sure that I have a winter that I don't, all my money doesn't go out the window?
I'll go first on that one. I'm gonna start with some of the basics, some of the most basics, but I end up seeing them all the time. One is if you have like a window unit that you have for air conditioning, is that thing is meant to be pulled. If you're not using it, it's fall, you're not needing it anymore, take it out and close that window down. The other on that same note is if you're not using your windows, meaning you're opening them up, you have a nice day or something, keep them locked. That's going to keep a lot of the drafts that a lot of people see through their windows. It helps keep those seals tight, and it also helps keep that window from sagging over time and everything else, and keeps keeps that cold air from coming in, so or leaving.
So, may I ask a couple questions? When you say take my window unit out, I'm sure that you're speaking of my air conditioner. What if
Correct.
I don't take it out? Can I put a cover over it?
I mean, you can, but it's just it's open to the elements. It's gonna let in a decent amount of really cold air. So if you have any means to be able to get that window unit out, it's it's gonna save you. I mean, and depending on the room, depending on the heating system, depending on a lot of things, it can make a room really uncomfortable. So depending how cold it gets. So.
Okay. And then in regards to windows, if I am in a situation where my home doesn't have newer windows, what are
Mhm.
some ways that I can save on my energy or weatherwise those windows as well?
Sam, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure, but I appreciate any help you'd have in. Yeah.
All right, I'll tag in whenever.
Okay, but so first, just to kind of inspect your windows, right? See if they're sealing closely, right? If they're um, uh, the where Lee was talking about how when they close, they should have gaskets that they're closing. Make sure those are in good shape. Um, you can check for the exterior around the opening of the window to see if there's any sort of holes or where you might need caulking to caulk around the edges to stop the air infiltration coming around. And making sure that they will close properly. Um, I, you know,
I can. Oh,
so,
go ahead. I mean, are you done with that, or
well, I have a couple other ideas, but
go
go
ahead?
ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, some people like to use the if you don't have exterior storm windows on there. So you're talking about an oval window that's at maybe single pane glass in it. Making sure that the window glazing is all in around the window, so you're not letting air in um, around the edges. Having on an exterior storm window, and also interior storm windows would be another option that you could look into to help, create stopping air, which is usually what my first thing is stopping air infiltrating into your house, and then some sort of additional insulation where like an interior storm window will help create an air bit or an insulation layer on the window. And then some people, if you don't have the time or the money or the know-how to do a storm window, you can get those plastic window glazing kits where you're not glazing, but window kits where you're basically putting on a piece of plastic around the window with some double-sided tape and taking a hair dryer and it just kind of shrink wraps up, but that just stops air from getting inside the house. Kind of going back to what Lee was saying about the air window unit, so you're by taking it out, you're stopping that air passing in and out through that. That's all.
I'll add something to that. That shrink film that you can put on. A lot of times, I end up seeing that usually by midwinter if they didn't clean the surface that they put that double stick tape on with something as simple as rubbing alcohol. It starts to come undone. So usually, if I'm doing that, I'll just have, most people have rubbing alcohol, put a little bit on a rag and clean the area you're going to be applying that tape to. And it will make it so that it's not going to fail midwinter and then you're trying to do it again. So just a little trick because they get dusty, they get whatever. So,
Okay.
I'll add something else to that also. So imagine that you have your window and you have your window trim around that on the inside. A lot of people, if you're talking like that shrink wrap, put that double-sided tape onto the trim, and there's nothing wrong with that. But depending on a few things with the window, you may have air that actually comes through the sides of the window from the outside. And, caulking, like Sam was saying, on the outside helps with that. But you may have air that moves through, comes through and hits the back of that trim and seeps out the sides. If you do a thermal imaging camera, a lot of times you can see that where you have little blue fins of cold air. So what some people will do is they'll get like a clear caulk or whatever and caulk on the inside next to their trim and next to their wall. And you can do it a couple of different ways. There's even peelable caulk that you can peel off later, but that's one of those little things that can make a big difference, especially if you have some very large windows and they're facing, against prevailing winds and whatnot, and you get a lot of wind load on them. So that's all I'd say about that.
Thank you for that. So, yes to window kits, but making sure that we clean the perimeter of the window before we use the double-sided tape so that it will stay the whole season.
Yeah. And then taking it down, you don't want to really leave that on over the summer. Some people do, but it will leave a nasty residue that can be difficult to get off sometimes the longer you let it sit. So,
Okay.
Or take the paint off with it when you're taking it off.
right. Yeah, when you go take it off, yeah. So
Jason is looking for the storm window for the prop. So we may circle back to windows if
okay,
um, if that's okay.
that's fine.
And we talk
Yeah,
about
and
installation.
instead a trick sometimes that I'll do if you want to try to find air leaks in the house, as far as air infiltrating into your home, is to turn on any exhaust fans you have, whether it's a dryer. Sometimes I'll kick on the dryer and I'll turn on a couple bath fans, whatever I got that's going to be expelling air out of the house, and we'll put that house on negative pressure. And then you can go around, like the window trim that we were talking about, and actually feel that air moving through. Another thing is base trim is another one. It can do the same thing. It can move underneath that mud sill or the base plate of your wall and hit that, and either come out from underneath that base trim or hit the wall or hit the back of the base trim and finger up. So, that's kind of the same deal. It's also a nice way to be able to tell, like we were talking about with the window sealing, if you're getting air movement through that and around doors with weather stripping and stuff like that. So I said it's kind of a cheater way to be able to exaggerate air infiltration into your home.
Using a piece of
So we-
incense too is also another way. If you don't have a good sense of feel, I've used incense to kind of,
Oh yeah,
as like a smoke stick or something,
right.
because that
Yep.
will, the smoke will get disrupted by the air coming into the house. So,
Yep. Wet your hand down too. Sometimes that makes it so you can actually feel those drafts a little bit easier too. So, yeah, combination of things.
So we talked about window sealing. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you would seal a door?
Go ahead, Sam.
well, one is first, depending on the age of the door, whether or not you have weather stripping on it, where the door meets the door jamb, and looking, closing the door, see if that weather stripping is like pushing up against it. You can look from the outside. You can also look from the inside on maybe a sunny day or something with the lights off inside to see if you see any light coming through on the edges. Same goes for the bottom of the door or at the threshold. A lot of doors have an adjustable threshold to them. And so that can be adjusted up and down to make sure it's sealing tight to the weather stripping on the bottom. I run across a lot of torn weather stripping on the bottom. A door's 2 years old and there's a rubber piece on the bottom that has failed. And so having to replace that so that it will seal on the bottom up against the threshold. but you can, some doors are going to be old enough to where they don't have weather stripping on them, so you can add that either by the weather stripping that I've seen has been nail on that pushes up. It's like a foam piece that pushes up against the door, and you nail it on to the door stop. And also adding door sweeps on either the interior or putting in a threshold that has like a rubber bumper on it so that the door sits tight up against it. So, go ahead.
You were talking about the daylight. Another thing I do sometimes if I have somebody helping me is, like you said, close the door, and the person on the outside gets a nice flashlight and goes around the whole perimeter of it. And they say stop, or you can mark it or however you want to do it. Put a little piece of tape in that area, and you know that there's something adjustment wise you have to do. Sometimes the latch plays a big part in that door not sealing. So sometimes if the weather stripping seems to be all right, and you're not seeing tears, it doesn't look like it's necessarily separated. Sometimes that door latch is actually malfunctioning a bit, where it's not fully closing. So it's another little detail to think about sometimes.
One of the things that I have a basement door, but in my basement door, I also have an outside door. Is there a way that I can stop the airflow from coming in? It feels like it's coming in both ways, from the basement and from that outside door. Is there a way to seal off the outside door?
That can be tricky. I guess I'm trying to envision sometimes they have what are called, I call them Bilko doors, where it's you open the door in the basement and there's a set of steps going up, and then you have a big metal door that opens up to be able to walk out. There are those styles, and then there's like a traditional, just a walkout where you just have a door and you open it up and it goes out of your basement. The issue with that I would be a little nervous about as far as trying to seal that is if that is needed for egress. Sometimes there's finished basements and they may want that as a second means of egress out of that basement. So, but I mean, most of the time, you can seal those doors just pretty much just like any other door. If you have like a wooden door or something, that can be, a little more tricky, like Sam was saying, as far as having to add the weather stripping or something like that. I don't know if that's answering your question or not.
Yep, and it's leading me to my next question. What is necessary to weatherize the basement?
Go ahead, take it.
I'll start. You can finish.
Okay.
So I don't know. So your house is, the bigger the temperature differentials between the outside and the inside, the more the temperature is going to want to stratify in the house due to the stack effect. So your basement's going to always seem colder because if you're losing heat out of the house, it's going to rise and go through the top of the house, and then it's going to get replaced by cold air coming in from the bottom, if that makes sense. Think of a chimney kind of effect. So the typical culprits are going to be any kind of opening, like a door or windows in your basement, but also where the foundation, the concrete or block foundation meets where the floor framing is. So there's a sill plate there, then there's usually floor joist on top of that sill plate. And, historically that area wasn't sealed very well for air infiltration, or there's imperfections in the top of the wall, the concrete wall, that allows air to come through. Or there's the framing is opened up because it's dried out over the years. So sealing, usually investigating around the rim joists and that sill plate, sealing it with like caulking or spray foam, and then making sure that like my son just purchased an older home in Kalamazoo recently, and there's absolutely no insulation at all around that in the joist there, and you can feel air coming in from the outside on cold nights. So we're in the process of starting to air seal that, and then we'll insulate it after it's air sealed. But you want to make sure that you stop the air coming in first, and then put the insulation in. Or your insulation is basically only going to act like an air filter. It'll have some minimal effect, but it's not going to stop that air exchange coming in. So, and so,
okay.
No, I'm good. That's just where I start, and then also looking for penetration, right? So a lot of times there's gas lines coming in and dryer vents going out, and anywhere that there's been a hole drilled going to the exterior, looking to make sure those areas are sealed up somehow, either with caulking or I should say sealant rather than caulking, because caulking is a product that is made to dry out over time. Why, if you're buying a sealant, which could also, act as a caulk, but a sealant tends to stay more pliable and flexible over time. So when you're purchasing products for your weatherization, you want to look for sealants as opposed to something that just is like painter's caulk or something, because those tend to dry up and shrink more.
Yeah, I'm going to add something to that too that I've noticed on cinder block foundations, where you find a lot of times on the older homes. And like Sam was talking, you're going to have your basement wall, and then you're going to have the top of that cinder block wall. And if you reach up there, a lot of times what they did is you have your 2x4, 2x6, or whatever. It sets in a little bit from that outside or the inside of the wall. And what I've noticed is that when they built them, they would put mortar or whatever over the tops of those holes. And over time, that breaks. And, a lot of times it may be just sitting there and not doing anything. So I'll go through and pull those off and then use something and stuff down into the hole so it wedges in, and then use like a foam in there to seal up, in a sense, the top of that open block. And then, doing the caulking and stuff like that. Another thing that I've done in the past is use, this is a closed cell foam board. This is 2 inches. It's an R10. And, like Sam was talking about with the rim joist, is, I'm having a hard time holding this thing right, is cutting it to, the right height and the right width. And what some people will do is, cut them really precise and like bang them in and then seal around it. You can double them up. It acts as, air does not necessarily move through that kind of a product. And, because it's set in, it gives you a better R value than just your standard fiberglass insulation. So that's another way. I've seen people where they walk by a construction site. I'm not condoning dumpster diving, but I've seen, where they're like chucking a half a sheet away, and you're like, ooh, and you're going in there and taking it so you can cut it up and use it in your rim joist, So, that's another nice way to do it. So, you said you can seal it with sealant, you can seal it with your foam, whatever. So, it's a nice way. It's something I need to do in my basement. I just have to get around to doing it. So,
with the foam in the insulation bays or in the rim joist bays, I'll tend to cut it an inch smaller all the way around.
Yep.
And then put spray foam around the edges.
I've done that also. The issue I found over time doing that is that foam sealant getting in behind that foam board and wanting to push it out as it dries. So one of those things. If you're doing something like that, I would suggest even throwing a long enough nail where it's not going to be poking outside, but it's going to hold that foam board in place temporarily while that foam is curing. So.
Yeah,
It's just a hassle I've run into over time. So
a couple of
you can cut that foam board with just a standard handsaw. Super easy to cut. Mark it up, cut it. So
Sam, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, holding it in place I use a couple screws and washers typically to hold that in place while the foam sets. And it doesn't take very long for the foam to set. And when it comes to spray foam, one thing I've been finding is I have a little spritzer, like a water spritzer. I spritz it first, foam it, and then this is very light, and a little spritzer afterwards, because it's a moisture cure product, and it'll cure a lot faster and more solid. Sorry if we're getting into the minutia here, but if you use a little bit of spritz on it.
Yeah. And a lot of times you read them and they'll say that, You can also get the foam guns that make it a little bit easier. Instead of like the cans that have the tube already attached to it, you can buy a relatively inexpensive gun that you attach and you get a larger container of foam, and you can save that foam. You can, they say you can leave it on the gun. I've had mixed results with that over the years, so I'll take it off, and then you have to have an acetone cleaner that cleans that gun out. But another little trick that I've done is if you have a gun like that, or even if you have one of the cans that has the straws on it, if you're having a hard time reaching, let's say it's an awkward area, tight, what you can do is go out and buy tubing that you can jam onto it, and then you can get that tubing into those smaller areas where you're not trying to get the can and hold it upside down and do everything you need to do. You can actually use that tubing to be able to get into those tight areas where that can may have a hard time and give you fits. So that's it on that.
Regardless, it's going to be messy if it's a place to get to. So there are things that you don't mind getting, foam on that's not going to come off very easily.
Yeah, and then when you do drop it, it's not that you're not going to. I've learned don't try to wipe it up when it's wet. Just leave it alone, let it sit, and it's easier to pick it off once it's dry and not smeared when it's wet.
Yep.
So, and have acetone to clean it, whatever. So.
Well, we're going to stay in the basement a little bit longer. And I have a couple of questions in regards to heating and cooling. Any tricks of the trade that you want to get started with?
I can do a start on that one. I've said this before in many other classes. You should be having your furnace, tuned up. That's where no matter how old or really how new, it's just going to make sure that the most amount of natural gas, is going to be used for being turned into usable heat. If it's electric, then whatever style furnace it is, it's going to be after it's tuned up, it should be a lot more efficient to be able to actually turn whatever product it's using for heat into actual heat. So I have that furnace tuned up. Keeping those air filters clean, changing them or whatever it is that you need to do. Talk about that. Have a stockpile of, however many filters you need, whether the 1 inch or the 2 inch or the 5 inch. It just depends. But making sure you have the correct size, the correct style that your furnace requires, so you're not trying to run that furnace with clogged filters. It's horrible for air conditioning. It's even horrible for heating. It makes the furnaces wear out a lot faster. If you have programmable thermostats, they're great. You can set them so that, when the only living thing at home is the cat or the dog, they don't care if it's, cooler. You can have that temperature turned down, or have that temperature turned down at a certain time in the evening once you're all warmed up in bed. and drop it, 5 degrees or whatever. There are also thermostats out there that are Wi-Fi connected. So if you have Wi-Fi, you get a relatively inexpensive Wi-Fi thermostat that you can get onto your smartphone. Say you're at work and you go, oh my gosh, I forgot to turn the heat down, and you can do it right there. So the other one that I'll say as far as furnaces goes is sometimes people, as far as comfort goes, when the furnace has been running quite a bit, midwinter, middle of February type deal, the indoor relative humidity can get extremely low. And this is one of those little tricky things where when that humidity is really low, it's uncomfortable for us and it makes it feel colder than it really is. So, sometimes people, they may have like a whole house humidifier or something like that, that is actually attached to the furnace. If you're having your furnace tuned up, they can make sure that's running properly and stuff. But you got to watch it that you don't put too much moisture into your home. That causes a whole bunch of other issues. But, from comfort wise, to me, if I keep that relative humidity at around 40 to 50%, that's about right. Above that, it's getting, in a sense, dangerous for various reasons. But, sometimes just having that humidity picked up just a little bit can make you feel more comfortable and make it so you're actually not going to try to turn that heat up more because you're feeling uncomfortable. So, you have any thoughts on that one, Sam?
Sure. So the one thing I've been running into lately is cold air returns that have holes in them, or they're not hooked up properly, or recently someone had a furnace where they had some duct cleaning done, and they'd cut out the sides so they could get the vacuum up the duct cleaning, and that wasn't resealed properly. So it was letting in air from the basement instead of pulling it from the different rooms of the house. So just kind of inspecting, make sure your ductwork is in good shape. And
Can I add something to that real quick?
Absolutely.
One thing is, and it took me a minute to kind of understand this as far as, a lot of people are like, well, what's the big deal about air leakage out of your ducts? It's all leaking into the house. True, that's true. But think of it this way. If I have a garden hose and I'm running from my spigot to my garden in my backyard, and I poke a bunch of holes in it, is that water going to get to the garden? No, or not as much. So that is sometimes a nice way of thinking of it. And, you can buy the duct sealant at any of the box stores. It comes in, jugs that, it's the consistency of pudding. And you can open it up and use like a cheap chip brush. And anywhere you see those two metal pieces of ductwork put together, there's a gap there, you can paint it on there. And it stays, flexible, and it seals that duct up. It's a nice, easy way to be able to do it. So, versus tape. Tape can be a whole other mess as far as trying to keep it actually sticking. So.
Right.
I am super excited to share a comment that we have. It says, how far should I turn down my thermostat when I'm not home or when I'm asleep?
I'll tone in on that one real quick. That's a tricky question. There are people out there that say if you turn it down, say more than like 5 degrees or so, that your furnace is going to have to work harder to get the house up to temperature. So I've heard that argument. Me around 5 degrees, but it's a personal preference. Me personally, I'd sleep if it were 40 degrees in the house. I think that'd be great. My wife would kill me. So, but that's the thing too. If you're turning your thermostat down, if it's for a longer period of time, as long as you're not turning it off, and it's not getting terribly cold in. If it's for an extended period of time, that's where you're going to be saving your money. If you're turning it up and turning it down, turning it up and turning it down, doing that sort of thing, it just messes with the furnace, and then you don't really have any energy savings, as far as my understanding goes. And this is something you can talk to if you have a good heating person. They would be able to put their 2 cents in on that one. I don't know if you have anything to add to that one, Sam.
I'm a proponent of like keeping your thermostat at one temperature, right?
Yep.
Just because that's like trying to put your house on cruise control, and keeping your house maybe colder than typical and trying to warm yourself, right? Because that, you know, if you're heating a lot of volume, if you've got your thermostat set at 72 or 68 or whatever, I keep my thermostat set at 60 to 62, you know, and then try and keep myself warm. And so either using, you know, a radiant light or a heated blanket or something like that in the wintertime. And definitely the sweaters and keeping warm. But that's just personal preference. Not everybody's like that, and I understand. So, but if you get your house sealed up well enough, keeping I feel it's better to just keep it, you know, at a constant rate, because then you're not trying to, your house isn't trying to, you know, go back up again and then it goes back down. You know, you're not running, that furnace just kicks on when it's necessary. So.
And I think sometimes it boils down to what kind of furnace you have and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of variation to that.
Right.
So if you have a boiler system where it's hot water heat, right, that's
right.
as responsive as a forced air system.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I have a tendency, we keep our house at 64, you know, in the wintertime. So, you know, night and day, that sort of thing. So we just keep it at that regular temperature. But some people like to turn their thermostat down. So, but, you know, like I said, that conversation with your heating professional, you know, they may be able to, you know, put some thought process into that, you know, as far as the type of system you have. So
we have another question. How often should I change my furnace filter? Will I save energy if I change it more often?
That's it depends kind of question, right? Because there's a lot of factors. You have pets, right? You're likely to collect more hair, and that could cause, or, you know, for the filter to catch and make it work harder. So, you know, so it's just a matter of figuring out how often it gets dirty, and then trying to keep on a regular schedule and make sure that it's, you know, operating at its proper, whatever the specifications are for that. So as far as, I didn't say that quite clearly, but you will save energy if the fan is not trying to work as hard to pull air through the system. So it's a matter of inspecting it and seeing how long it takes to get dirty for your particular situation.
I'll add to that one. It's, you know, part of the having those clean ones nearby is, you know, you can shut your furnace down and pull your filter out. That's important. Shut it off before you pull it out. Shut your furnace down, pull it out, look at it. And sometimes it can be difficult to, you know, like, you know, it looks a little dirty, but, you know, is it? You know, and sometimes having, you know, a new one to be able to compare them side by side and go, oh, yeah, it is dirty, is nice. Another one, and usually it's pretty bad if it gets to this point, you can hear a difference in tone. Usually when that blower is running, if it's trying to pull air through a clogged filter, it changes how it sounds. Back to, you know, your house is going to talk to you. You just have to understand what it's saying, sort of thing. So, you know, some people will use that too. So, but, you know, generally, to me, I mean, generally, I'll look at it if you're using a 1-inch filter, it's usually every 30 days of operation, meaning that fan is running. So that's important to also remember as far as how you run your thermostat. You know, there are people out there that make it so that the blower motor that actually moves that air around only comes on when it's calling for heat, and that's fine. That's the auto setting on your thermostat. Well, there's an on setting on the thermostat also, meaning that the blower motor runs, moving that air around, but it's not heating. And same with cooling, but it's not doing that, but it's just moving air. So there are thermostats out there that will keep track of how often that that blower motor is running, because the thermostat knows when it's running and when it's not. And it may have a little thing that pops up and says, "Hey, you've reached this set time or whatever. You may want to check your filter," as a reminder. So, but 1 inch every 30 days roughly of operation. But again, if you have 15 cats, you may have to do it a little.
Thank you. So we have a little bit more time and wanted to talk about one of my favorite subjects, frozen pipes. Do you want to tell us what we need to do to avoid frozen pipes?
Well, all the stuff we were talking about as far as that work doing, that work of stopping that cold air infiltration, into your basement, and adding that R value with the insulation is going to help. Those penetrations and stuff, because I've seen it where, a water spigot is, say, going outside, and they may not have covered it like we talked about in some of the other classes, and they didn't seal it, and you get that cold air that's just running along that, especially like copper lines. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of whether the ceiling and stuff like that is going to help that, as far as I'm concerned. Sometimes it gets super bitterly cold, and if you're in one of those situations, good old polar vortex or something, and it's going to get down to like -20 or something like that outside. At that point, what I'll do is, especially if you have, say, in a bathroom or a kitchen or something like that, especially if it's on an outside wall, is to open those doors up, let some of that heat get into that under cabinet, and then also just trickle that water in the tub or in the sink, just to let that water move a little bit in those lines. And it's going to be less apt to freeze up on you when that water is moving a little bit. Sam, I'll let you take some of that.
That sounded pretty good there. So hopefully you don't have freezing inside, but it happens. Even a heat lamp. I don't like the tapes or whatever, but having a heat lamp or a incandescent bulb somehow to like keep someplace that might be susceptible to freezing would be good too. So.
I'll add something to that. Actually, I just thought about, because I had this issue in an old house. A lot of times, the older homes will have what used to be a back porch, and a lot of times it may have been converted into a bathroom. So if you're in your basement and you might have a couple of cinder blocks open, and you look in there, you shine a flashlight in there, and you see the water lines and stuff like that. If you have something like that, that should be insulated. You can put that same foam board like we were talking about before. You can actually apply that to the cinder block. That's going to help insulate that cinder block. But the point I'm getting at is that a lot of times the issue we would have is that either they didn't take out a large enough area to let warmer air into that area to be able to help those pipes from freezing up. So we got into the habit, if we knew it was going to be getting really cold, we would get a little fan and, set it up so that it was just blowing some of that warmer air that was found in the basement into that kind of a dead zone where those pipes could freeze, especially on those like side porch converted bathroom style deals, Hopefully that made sense.
So if we run into a situation that we have frozen pipes, what should we do?
turn off the water first, find out where it's coming from, right? So stop, it's typically going to split along the edge of the pipe. You're going to have water showing up somewhere. It's finding out where that, turn off your water, turn off the hot water tank. If you can, if it's to identify what line it's on, whether it's on the cold water side or the hot water side, and then either repair it or isolate it somehow if you have valves to be able to do that. So is that
I want to add a safety thing to that, and you usually hear it at least once a season, it seems like. So somebody's pipes freeze, and if you're lucky, you see the water. Sometimes you don't. It freezes, and you don't realize you have a leak until you go to try to turn the faucet on. It's not working. The point that I'm getting at is when the people get out the heat gun and they start going, full blast on their pipes. Sometimes those heat guns get extremely hot, and I've heard of people actually catching their house on fire trying to thaw out their pipes. So, not necessarily catching the pipes on fire, but maybe what's behind it, like the insulation or like the rim joist or whatever, So, sometimes, if you're not comfortable with that, sometimes it's calling out that plumber to be able to take a look at them and to be able to thaw them out. You can insulate your pipes also. They talk about insulating the hot lines. You can insulate all your lines. And it's just another layer of protection, for that from those pipes freezing up. Buy those in long strips, at the stores, and wrap them around the pipes and whatnot. So, but yeah, be cautious with that. If you're using like a heat gun or something along that line, even heat tape can be a bit of an issue.
Don't use a torch.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and that's the other one. I've heard people get the propane torch out and they're like,
right.
Oh no. So
yeah, it's better to either like we saying to insulate or try and be more proactive about it before you get to the point of a first pipe. So, but it happens even on those frost-free spigots. If it gets really cold, those can even split if there's a little bit of water in there. So.
Yep. Yeah, we talk about that as far as, I still will if there's a shut off to them, I shut them off, but then I open up the spigot on the outside in the fall to let any water that's trapped between the shut off and the spigot itself to drain that water out. Because I've seen that where it freezes, expands, and cracks it.
Yeah.
So, and you don't realize it until you turn on your water in the spring and you have a mess.
Okay. Last thing, is there any weatherization that I need to do to my appliances?
You could, so for your hot water tank, right? I like a hot water heater blanket, right? I think those are good, and same with the insulating your hot water pipes, and I think it's like the minimum recommendation for insulation on your pipes is the first 3 to 6 feet coming out from both sides of the hot water tank. If you were to take like an infrared camera, you would see how both those water lines coming into it and going out are like hotter than the surrounding area. I think a water tank insulation is kind of a pain to install. They're not super easy necessarily, and you need to be real careful, especially if you have a gas one, that all the air intakes aren't covered and you have access to whatever kind of ignition system that it calls for. And they'll pay for themselves eventually by lost standby water, standby heat loss there in the water tank.
With water heaters, kind of a rule of thumb I'll go on, if you're having to replace your water heater, try to get as efficient a water heater as you can, whether it's a tank or tankless. They're built in with more insulation. And the interesting part is you can set your hand on top of an old tanked water heater, and depending on what the temperature is of that water, you can have both at the same temperature. And the old one, you put your hand on top, and you can't leave it there too long because you have so much heat loss coming out of that tank. And then you put your hand on a brand new one that is the same water temperature inside, and you can barely feel it. And that's a bit of the difference in that energy efficiency of that particular model. And usually it boils down to how much insulation is in the sidewalls and top of the tank itself, from the factory. But yeah, like Sam was saying, if you are insulating, you're doing that wrap, be very careful. It's you get near that flame, you block air intakes, and you can cause a whole other mess of issues. So that'll cost a lot more than the money you saved with wrapping it. So, don't. I always say don't go with the cheapest thing you can possibly get because you will get it. You'll get that. If you buy the absolute cheapest, say, water heater, you're going to get that type of performance. So,
I think in tuning up your furnace, like Lee was saying, is important. If you have a heat pump, making sure that all the drain lines on that are proper and working, and everything's sealed around the openings on that is another thing to look into. What other appliances you would want to make sure are ready for winter?
Well, I'd say with like you get some of the electric style furnaces, like a heat pump, they have an outside what looks like a condensing unit, for air conditioners, and keeping that clear. I've seen it where people think of it only as air conditioning, and let's say they're doing their fall cleanup, and they lean their table up next to it or whatever, and it blocks that air movement through it. If that is part of your heating system, sometimes they are. It's actually pulling that heat, that latent heat out of the air, even in the middle of the winter. If that's blocked, it's going to mess with your system. So, understanding that, I said, talking to that heating person that's coming out, if you have that type of system where it's pulling the heat from that February air, and using a refrigerant to heat up your home, reverse of air conditioning, then yeah, you have to think about that unit outside as far as not blocking it. I've seen people cover them up thinking they're air conditioners, and like, no, don't do that. So, understanding your system, is important.
A friend of mine was trying to start up their forced air heating system this last week, and he wouldn't start. And so we took the cover off to see why it wouldn't start, and it had a signal on there. If you take off the cover of your furnace, there's a little this light's blinking, and here's what the chart says that it is going on, and it had to do with the air. Like the air clearing or the air pressure setup, and went outside, and sure enough, on the air intake, there was a piece of plywood leaning against it, and that was blocking the airflow. And so
either the intake or the exhaust. Yeah. Yep.
So, and then I think in past class we talked about those getting blocked possibly by snow blowers or something during the season, right?
Yep.
And then that'll cause your heating system to shut down, or your gas furnace to shut down.
Yep.
And so always check to make sure that nothing's blocking those pipes for the air intake and exhaust.
Yep. And sometimes you have water heaters the same way. You may have a water heater, like your tanked one that I know you just got. It has the furnace, it has a fresh air intake and an exhaust. And, depending, most of the time their gooseneck come up and then, they're a certain height off the ground. But yeah, I've seen those get blocked too. And then all of a sudden your water heater is going, nope, can't turn on. Something's blocking, and you'll have no hot water. And you pay a person to come out and move, like I said, like a piece of plywood or something away from your vent. And they say, that was it. $150, please. Thank you. So
I have two more quick questions. The first question is, can you seal your basement too much?
I don't think that's possible, personally.
With no air movement. Can you seal it so that there's no air movement?
That's very difficult to do.
Okay.
I don't think that'd be a problem necessarily, unless you have a damp water issue, right? So then you'd be running a humidifier down there possibly to deal with that. So.
Yeah, and I'll say something about that also. And Sam was kind of talking about this earlier, as far as I call them a heat sink. So if you have an exposed block wall, that wall is always going to be colder because it's up against that cold ground, and so any heat that's in the basement will have a tendency to migrate towards that cold wall, and it's not to suck up the heat. So I've seen it where people use, like I said, that foam sheets or whatever, and attach it to that block wall, creating a thermal break where it's a little less likely to be able to be losing that heat. So there's a lot of little tricks you can do. If you're really interested in a lot of the energy efficiencies and stuff, you can hire an energy rater to come out, and they'll do a blower door test on your home. They'll look for air infiltrations. A lot of them will work with you, kind of saying, all right, this is the lowest hanging fruit. This is the easiest stuff you can do to be able to save, a certain amount. And, yes, you pay for it, but a lot of times with either the money you save or the money you don't spend because, energy prices are going up, that's something else to keep in mind. A lot of times those energy prices are going up, and people do all this energy efficiency, sealing and air sealing and all that sort of stuff, and they're expecting to see a huge decrease in their monthly rate. But let's say they did that work in the summer, and they're going off last year's rates, but what they're paying is close to the same. You have to kind of keep that in mind also, is that sometimes it's not necessarily saving money, but keeping it, a little more level, I guess, is a way to look at it too.
Okay.
Go ahead. I do have another question for you, Mr.
Okay. My question was the one about the basement. I've got about a 20-year-old home, and it's got insulation on the walls in the basement. And, up where the house meets, it's insulated, so it's warm.
Okay.
But I somebody cleaned my vents anyway, and he said you don't have enough air circulation in your basement. I have cobwebs. And that's what I was wondering about. If it's sealed too much, what is the issue that I don't have enough air movement in the basement? Or was he just telling me something?
That is one of those things. I've seen it where
that's not an issue. I don't heat it; it's warm, but it.
Yeah, do you have condensation issues, moisture issues in that basement in the wintertime when you're running your furnace and stuff?
In the winter, no. In the summer, I'm running a dehumidifier.
Okay. So it's like pretty much any basement. I personally don't see an issue with the lack of air movement or lack of airflow. Sam, I don't know what your thought is on that one.
No, that sounds kind of good, actually. But having, I'm sorry.
No, I said good. If it's not a problem, I mean, like I said, it just. He said that's why I had all the cobwebs, is I didn't have enough air circulation.
Um, well, as long as you're not having like moisture issues down there, right? Um, you know, I would think that's good. You know, the cobwebs. I live in a 18 late 1800s, early 1900s home that's very leaky. And I get plenty of cobwebs in the main living room in that. So I don't know if that's necessarily an indicator. If you're worried about like not having air exchange in the basement, I don't know if there's a door you can open or a window. Obviously, you don't want to do that in the wintertime necessarily. And then in the summertime, you probably don't want to do that because of moisture issues, and humidity.
Okay, so that brings up another. On your furnace, there's this thing that you turn, and you turn it one way in the summer and one way in the winter. What is that doing?
That is probably a whole house humidifier, most likely.
Well, it doesn't have a humidifier. It's something to do with the airflow through the furnace.
So it could be a cold air intake from the outside, depending on the style of the furnace.
Okay.
And so that's like going to pull in air, makeup air for the different seasons, right? For the furnace, it's pulling in exterior air that never designed your heating.
Okay, so it would pull. You turn it one way in the summer because it will pull outside air in, but you wouldn't want to pull in cold air because then you have to heat it more.
Yeah. I've seen that where, like Sam, I think what Sam was talking about is what's called combustion air. And it was set up, that sort of thing used to be code because it was, the furnace didn't pull in its own fresh air like the higher efficiency ones do now. So it needed combustion air for that natural gas combustion. And I've seen it where they changed that furnace over to a higher efficiency furnace where it's pulling that fresh air, or in a sense that combustion air, from the outside through a sealed pipes, but they never deal with the old combustion air intake. And again, this is where that heating person, if they have a decent understanding of that, they may look at it and say, your furnace doesn't need combustion air anymore, or your water heater doesn't necessarily need combustion air anymore. That might be something you'd be able to seal off. But again, that, if you have those older units, you may still need it. So I'll throw in that for that one. So,
Lee, were you going to say something earlier too about the basement? Something you wanted to add to that? What I was saying?
Me?
Yeah, I thought you had one other thing you wanted to say. Sorry.
Boy, if I did, it's gone.
I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I hope that there was value that you were able to receive from this workshop. And I look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday. Same place, 810 Bryant Street, 6 o'clock.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.